The world of R&B was shaken by a heart-wrenching announcement. Nico McKnight, the 32-year-old son of singer Brian McKnight and his former wife Julie McKnight, had passed away after a long and brave battle with cancer. Nico's death came not just as a tragedy of life lost too soon, but also as a deeply emotional moment fraught with unresolved pain. His passing occurred with a looming silence from his father, a man whose relationship with his older children had long been publicly fractured. For many, this loss was compounded by the knowledge that Nico never received the love and reconciliation he yearned for from his father. The news struck a chord among fans, amplifying sorrow with outrage and reflection.
Public backlash against Brian and Leilani. Following the tragic news of Nico McKnight's passing, a storm of public outrage ignited on social media platforms. Longtime fans of Brian McKnight, many of whom had grown up listening to his heartfelt love songs and emotional ballads, expressed a deep sense of betrayal. What began as mourning for a young man lost to cancer quickly transformed into a reckoning of Brian's role as a father and Leilani's involvement in the fractured family dynamic. Social media timelines and comment sections became flooded with messages denouncing both Brian and Leilani. The backlash was not only about Brian's silence in the face of his son's death, but also about a long-standing pattern of behavior that the public was no longer willing to overlook. Users reposted old interviews and statements in which Brian distanced himself from his older children, often using language that was harsh and demeaning. These resurfaced clips revealed a man seemingly eager to erase parts of his past and unwilling to take accountability for the emotional damage caused by his words and actions. Leilani, who had often shared curated images of her life with Brian and their children, became a central figure in the criticism. While she had once been praised for her poise and grace, many now saw her as complicit in Brian's estrangement from his biological children. Her social media, once filled with admiration, was overtaken by heartbroken and angry followers demanding answers. Critics argued that her public portrayal of Brian as a devoted family man clashed starkly with the emotional reality experienced by his estranged children. The outrage was further fueled by the stark contrast between Brian's enthusiastic celebration of his stepchildren and his apparent neglect of Nico and his siblings. Posts showcasing school graduations, birthdays, and personal milestones with his new family were juxtaposed with the glaring absence of any recognition for his older children. For many, this selective affection pointed to a deliberate attempt to rewrite his family narrative, a narrative that excluded the children from his previous relationships. As public discourse grew louder, the McKnights found themselves at the center of a cultural conversation about parenthood, legacy, and moral responsibility. Fans and observers alike demanded a level of transparency and accountability that had long been missing. What was once seen as a private matter within a complicated family now resonated with a broader audience who saw in Nico's story a reflection of larger issues surrounding love, abandonment, and the consequences of emotional neglect. The outrage reached new heights when fans began examining Brian's past interviews and comments. In these clips, he often described his estranged children as ungrateful or even harmful presences in his life. In one especially controversial video, he likened maintaining relationships with them to allowing toxicity into his household, which many interpreted as an emotionally bankrupt justification for detachment. Fans began to see these patterns not as isolated moments, but as part of a long-standing philosophy of emotional abandonment masked as self-care. Estranged until the end. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of this story is the unhealed rift between Brian and Nico. As Nico endured his battle with cancer, there was no sign of reconciliation or support from his father. The emotional gap between them remained unclosed, and now permanently so. Social media became a platform for mourning not just the loss of a young life, but the absence of a father's love during his son's most vulnerable time. Despite the severity of Nico's illness, there was no public gesture of concern or compassion from Brian. No hospital visits, no phone calls, not even a message of solidarity. This silence was interpreted by many as emotional abandonment at its most unforgivable. The lack of closure not only deepened the pain for those closest to Nico, but also for the countless onlookers who saw this as an egregious failure of fatherhood. Comments beneath Leilani's Instagram posts quickly turned from admiration to outrage. Fans expressed their heartbreak with searing honesty. Some questioned Leilani directly, asking how she could support a man who turned his back on his own child. Others declared that karma would inevitably address the perceived wrongdoing. To many, Nico's suffering was as much about his illness as it was about the emotional neglect he endured from the one person who should have stood by him, his father. Leilani's role and fan reactions. Leilani McKnight, who once received admiration for her picturesque family life, found herself at the center of a storm. Her past declarations of Brian being an amazing father now feel disingenuous to many, especially considering the open favoritism shown to the children she shares with Brian. Critics have argued that her praise only exacerbates the hurt felt by Brian's estranged children and their supporters. Fans were quick to remind Leilani that as a mother herself, she should have understood the importance of a father's presence in his children's lives. They questioned her moral stance and her role in supporting or at least enabling Brian's rejection of his older children. The online backlash was emotionally charged, with many expressing that the real tragedy wasn't just Nico's passing, but that he died without the closure or love that a father's support could have brought. Even those who once admired her for her elegance and resilience began to see her in a new light. They pointed out the contrast between her glowing tributes to Brian and her refusal to acknowledge the pain his estranged children experienced. Many wondered whether her silence was rooted in loyalty or indifference, or worse, a deliberate erasure of the children who did not fit into the new image she and Brian had cultivated. Brian's justification and cold philosophy. Brian McKnight's justifications for cutting off his children have been widely criticized. In a video clip that resurfaced in the wake of Nico's death, Brian stated that he chose to remove evil and negativity from his life, even if it was related. To many, these statements felt like an attempt to rationalize emotional abandonment, devoid of empathy or self-reflection. While Brian was publicly expressing affection for his stepchildren, celebrating their achievements, posting heartfelt messages, and building memories, his biological children were seemingly erased from his narrative. This selective parenting did not go unnoticed, and for many fans, it painted a deeply troubling picture of his values and character. The cold philosophy underlying his justifications raised alarms about the emotional health of a parent who could so easily sever ties with his children. Rather than working through difficulties, offering forgiveness, or seeking reconciliation, Brian appeared to double down on a philosophy that equated criticism or conflict with toxicity. This approach, while cloaked in the language of self-care, ultimately rang hollow for many observers who believe that true love, especially parental love, is unconditional. Public praise, private pain. A major turning point in the public's perception was a birthday tribute from Leilani, in which she hailed Brian as the most amazing father to our children. What might have once been seen as a touching sentiment quickly turned controversial. With Nico's death still fresh in the public's mind, the post was revisited with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Commenters flooded the post with criticism, accusing both Brian and Leilani of hypocrisy and emotional cruelty. Some expressed outrage that Brian could be publicly celebrated as a father while one of his children died feeling unloved. The pain expressed in these comments underscored a widespread sense of injustice, further fueling the narrative that Nico had been wronged not only in life, but also in memory. Some fans went so far as to repost the tribute alongside clips of Brian's past dismissals of his children, creating viral comparisons that drew even more attention to the hypocrisy. The public consensus was clear. Words of praise for Brian's parenting could no longer be taken at face value. The stark contrast between his public image and private actions had reached an undeniable tipping point, a legacy tarnished. Brian McKnight's musical legacy, once defined by songs of love and vulnerability, now sits under the shadow of a deeply personal controversy. The soulful artist who once brought people to tears with ballads of longing is now viewed by many as a man who failed his own children when they needed him most. Leilani's role in shaping or supporting this family dynamic has also come under scrutiny. Critics argue that her consistent public praise for Brian's parenting paints a misleading picture, one that excludes and invalidates the experiences of his estranged children. For many, her silence, or worse, her complicity, is just as troubling, more than a family feud. This situation has evolved into more than just a private family dispute. It has become a social reckoning about emotional responsibility, accountability, and the long-lasting effects of neglect. Nico's death is a painful reminder of the importance of reconciliation, of not letting pride or unresolved anger rob families of love and connection. Brian's silence in the aftermath of his son's passing has only deepened public dismay. There has been no message of grief, no tribute, no public acknowledgement of the loss. The absence of any emotional response from a father who once sang about the depths of love is perhaps the most heartbreaking element of all. Rest in peace, Nico. Nico McKnight's life and passing have touched the hearts of many, not just for the tragedy of his illness, but for the emotional pain he endured. His story is one of longing, for health, for peace, and most painfully, for a father's love. His legacy is a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride, the necessity of emotional presence, and the irreversible damage that silence and rejection can inflict. Rest in peace, Nico. Your story will not be forgotten, and your life serves as a powerful reminder that love, especially from a parent, should never be conditional. To all those following this unfolding story, thank you for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay informed.